one young woman twice brought up the issue of salvation. What does that look like? And Peterson's like, I don't even concern myself with that question. Well, that's highly problematic because that's something you have to go after. Not necessarily me. It was me in this instance, but Christians have to be combating these things because these are things that are confusing people. When you have someone who sets himself up, the way the Apostle Paul puts it in 2 Corinthians 10:5, sets himself up with pretension of knowledge of God. And then he tells you, he can't tell you how to get to heaven. He can't tell you if Jesus was real or if the resurrection was real. He doesn't know. That kind of guy, you got to demolish him. And the reason you have to is because these are not trivial questions. He's leading people straight to hell, potentially.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Counterrevolution Podcast. Today, I am very, very excited to be talking to one of my heroes, no lie. I feel like I'm saying that a lot lately, but Larry is definitely at the top of that list. This is Larry Alex Taunton. Larry, welcome to the Counterrevolution Podcast.
It's great to be with you, John. I'm sure you say that to all the girls.
Well, thank you so much for stopping by. I have a short kind of description, but I will allow you to fill in whatever you want to fill in. Larry Alex Taunton, this is according to Founders Ministries, is an executive director of Fixed Point Foundation, a freelance columnist contributing to USA Today, Fox News, First Things, The Atlantic, CNN, Daily Caller, The American Spectator. He is also the author of The Grace Effect, the Gospel Coalition Book of the Year, The Faith of Christopher Hitchens, and at that time, he was soon to be releasing Around the World in more than 80 days, which has been released already for a number of years now. Larry Alex Taunton is also the host of a podcast, Ideas Have Consequences with Larry Taunton. So, Larry, is there anything else that you'd like to add to that bio?
I think you covered all the bases.
Yeah, well, actually, now that I think about it, Larry is also a father and a grandfather. But Larry, you have a podcast, Ideas Have Consequences. I affectionately call you the Idea Man, the man of ideas. But can you give a quick kind of description of your podcast and what inspired you to start it, and why is it called Ideas Have Consequences?
Well, thank you, John. Part of what I try to do in my work is to work at both ends, if you will, of the kind of ideological conveyor belt. So think of it like this: that you have the media working on one end, and policymakers and academics and others, where the ideas are themselves packaged, and then they travel down the conveyor belt and enter into the culture. And I try very hard to, not only am I working at one end and that I'm, hopefully developing some ideas, dissecting ideas, demolishing some ideas, elucidating others, but I also want to work at the other end and expose to people how ideas affect the culture, what's happening. So when I go to a place, as like the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland, I'm sitting with a lot of people who are developing policy. But you see, they themselves are insulated from it. They have the wealth that they're able to do that. So they pontificate about how, everyone, should be living in smart cities or driving smart cars, but they don't do any of that. They don't have really any idea what's going on with the lives of real people. And sadly, most of the time, they don't actually care. And you also have, people working in media, not necessarily maliciously. It's just that sometimes this is the way it goes, is they get up in the morning, in their Manhattan, condo, and hit the coffee maker, sit down, read the New York Times, and then sit at their computer in their slippers and begin pontificating about this or that idea without ever actually stepping into a red state or into the third world or into those places where those ideas are having an impact on the lives of real people. So, and ideas have consequences. That's what we're doing, is we're trying to expose, we're trying to elucidate, we're trying to unpack ideas. But I should add, but in a way that the average person can follow that. This is an academic podcast. We may unpack academic ideas, but I'm discussing them in ways that ordinary people, they're not alienated by by the language, by the lingo. And you see, often that's what happens, is academics and policymakers can feel like you're not very smart because they use their own vocabulary. But when you hear those ideas broken down in a way that that isn't alienating, in a vocabulary that you use, you're like, oh, okay, I get it. Now I know what they mean when they talk about sustainability, or something like that.
Yeah. I was thinking about it as you were talking. Your podcast basically takes really complex things and explains it in kind of layman's terms where intellectuals can deal with it, but also people like me who just, you know, regular people can also follow along. But so where, if you don't mind, because I feel like I heard this term from a lot of different people. Where does this term come from? Like, um, as far as you're concerned, where did this term? Who was the first person you heard say ideas have consequences? And kind of, I'm trying to see what drew you to this particular phrase and its implications.
Well, there's a very famous book by a man named Richard Weaver, long since dead, but it's called "Ideas Have Consequences," and that was a book that had an impact on a generation, of thinkers. And so I'm sure Weaver didn't invent, didn't coin the term, but his book certainly popularized it. And in Fixed Point Foundation, the organization that I founded and that I direct, we've been using that term for quite a while because we want people to understand, the intersection, of faith and culture. And there are a lot of ways that happens, but that might be an academic idea. How does faith interact with this or that academic idea? How does faith interact with um, the many things that we're seeing coming out of universities, or out of Washington, or out of Davos, or some other places?
So, um, and another thing that I've heard actually from you first, but ever since then I kind of pick it up now from different people, is kind of thinking about ideas biblically, because I feel like, as at least in the circles of Christians I've been around, we tend to not we're kind of super spiritual in the terms of kind of the supernatural, but we don't know how to connect it to the ideas that affect the day to day kind of life, and like you said, policy. And so, what I'm driving at is, I've heard you a lot of times quote Second Corinthians 10 3 through 5, which talks about, as you spoke a few minutes ago, about
We do.
demolishing arguments
Yes.
and things like that. Can you elaborate a little bit on that passage and
Well,
how
it
it?
says this, 2 Corinthians 10:5, we demolish arguments and every lofty pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God. So, what Paul is referring to there is, I mean, it's the very work that I'm engaged in. He might have been, combating, let's say, a heresy. And of course he was. We know that in Galatians, he's combating, the heresy of the circumcision party. Now, you shouldn't picture people with little party hats on and, party favors.
Yeah.
Rather, we're talking about people who are sharpening their knives and saying that you cannot become a Christian unless you first become a Jew,
Right.
which means you need to be circumcised. So it wasn't that they were having, parties where they were circumcising each other. That if you have that vision in mind, that would not be a party that anybody would enjoy attending. But though the Judaizers, as they were called, that was actually a very wicked heresy that they were preaching, and it was because it was confusing a lot of new believers or would-be believers, because you maybe you've just become a Christian, and then somebody says, no, you're not a Christian yet. I mean, you haven't submitted yourself to the law. You haven't been circumcised. And this caused a huge problem. So Paul was combating this, but he was combating a variety of other things. We know that the Apostle John, was going back and forth with a guy named Cerinthus, and that he was writing, his epistles in part to combat some of the ideas that he was promoting. And those were Gnostic heresies, that Jesus himself wasn't, didn't actually appear in the flesh. He was like a wraith. He wasn't actually, physically crucified on the cross and bodily resurrected. These were Gnostic heresies that they were combating. Well, today, we have, as Solomon said, there's nothing new under the sun. So we continue to see these kinds of things. So for me, in recent days, I've been going after Jordan Peterson. And it's not because, listen, Jordan Peterson is a critic of woke culture, as someone who offers commentary in his field of clinical psychology. I can appreciate a lot, that he has to say. But he doesn't know anything that's worth listening to when it comes to God, the biblical God, or the Bible itself. And, he appeared recently in a 90-minute video called, originally called One Christian versus 20 Atheists. And then when Peterson got in there and denied that he wouldn't accept any designation. He wouldn't acknowledge he was a Christian or a non-Christian. He just wouldn't accept anything. He's playing quite coy. And then you have students who are asking him, these atheists who are asking him, how do I know if the resurrection is real? And he's like, I don't know. And someone is talking to him about, hell and sin. What is it? And how do you avoid it? And he couldn't really answer that question. And one young woman twice brought up the issue of salvation. What does that look like? And Peterson's like, I don't even concern myself with that question. Well, that's highly problematic, because that's something you have to go after. Not necessarily me. It was me in this instance, but Christians have to be combating these things, because these are things that are confusing people. When you have someone who sets himself up, the way the Apostle Paul puts it in 2 Corinthians 10:5, sets himself up with pretension of knowledge of God. And then he tells you, he can't tell you how to get to heaven. He can't tell you if Jesus was real or if the resurrection was real. He doesn't know. That kind of guy, you got to demolish him. And the reason you have to is because these are not trivial questions. He's leading people straight to hell, potentially.
Yeah, it's very funny, because I did watch a few minutes of that Jubilee video with my wife. And first I saw the title, I was like, oh my God, Larry is probably losing it right now.
Well, you were right.
Yeah, I was like, and then he kept going. I'm like, oh, nope. And then at some point I felt bad for him. I couldn't take it no more. I just said, look, I'm not watching this anymore. But even the prompt question saying that the atheists don't understand God, I'm like, but neither do you.
Well, listen, to me, it was very sad that in the course of 90 minutes, Jesus' name was mentioned twice. And on neither of those occasions was it Jordan Peterson to mention his name. In fact, on both occasions, it was a young woman by the name of Zena, an atheist, who was asking him about salvation. Twice she asked him about that, and twice he failed her. But on both instances where she brought up Jesus, he couldn't get away from Jesus quickly enough. He wanted to move the topic away from Jesus. Now to me, that's highly problematic. Now, I will say this: I wouldn't have watched it. I just knew I would vomit, when I watched this thing. I mean, your reaction is absolutely right in what you said to your wife. I ended up watching it several times because the Federalist reached out to me and asked me if I would write a column about it.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, the last thing I want to do is more commentary on Jordan Peterson. I'd written about him before. I've done a podcast about him before. And I don't want to be perceived as just, always pounding on Jordan Peterson.
Yeah.
But in this case, it was easy to pound on him because I honestly was looking for nice things I could say about him in the video. But when I see atheist kids coming and asking eternal questions, and where you have an opportunity to lead them to the cross, you need, it's important that people understand the commentary about the Bible. There's many good things that can come from that. There's much knowledge that can come from that. Yeah. The goal isn't to make you religious. I've seen a lot of people say, well, Jordan Peterson, he converted me. My question is, to what? He didn't convert you to Jesus. He doesn't know Jesus. It's quite clear. The cross he rejects. So you got to convert people to something, and you must have an end goal in mind. And the goal for a Christian isn't to make someone religious. It isn't to make someone more spiritual. It isn't to give someone an appreciation of the Bible as a religious text, or to have warm and fuzzy feelings about God. Hell will be full of people like that. The goal is to take people to Jesus. It's to take people to the foot of the cross. And Jordan Peterson, this version of Jordan Peterson, who's not a Christian, cannot get people there. And that cannot be pointed out enough. So when people are, paying to go and listen to him in order to get some kind of biblical wisdom from him, you need to go knowing that he doesn't know the Bible. He does not understand the Bible's central thesis, Jesus, at all. And so I don't really think he has anything really to contribute on that topic. But anyway, as it relates to my work, these are occasionally the things that I'm commenting on. But I'm also going after atheism and Islam and a variety of other issues.
Yeah, very good. So, Larry, as I'm sure you have noticed, my podcast and kind of my passion as of late has to do with education, specifically younger ages from K through 12, um, because I believe that education is discipleship. I really believe this. And it doesn't matter who does the education. I think formal education and spiritual kind of education are two sides of the same coin. Anyone who is in the position of teaching has also the privilege or the power to lead people in kind of values and morals and spiritual things. So my quest has been that I want to contribute or to participate in the movement to reclaim education as a ministry of the family and the church. That being said, I believe one of the worst ideas with regards to ideas having consequences, one of the worst ideas is that in the last 150 years, maybe, the church decided to take basically give that role that at least to partner with the government by and large the state to educate children. What is let me start with first your own decisions with you and your wife, with your own children. What drove you to make those decisions to educate how you guys chose to educate, if you don't mind?
Sure, my own. How old are you, John?
Just turned 40 this year.
Okay. My own children range in age from 28 to, soon, let's see, 37. Okay, so, and I have four children, and that's, where I say 28, 27 to 37. And, so when we were first addressing these issues, the idea of homeschooling seemed, sort of cult-like, that idea of doing that. But my wife convinced me we should consider it, and I'm very grateful to her for that. Our children should be eternally grateful to her for that. That was one of the best decisions we ever made with our children. We, also supplemented, with people outside who could teach things, that we didn't feel competent in order to teach. But, looking at the data, and I myself, I'm a former educator, so I saw what was happening in schools, what was happening in elite schools, what's happening in Christian schools. And for the most part, I just wasn't terribly impressed. And, the concern that I had with homeschooling was I thought, oh my gosh, how are we going to have the time to do this? And what's very funny is that homeschooling requires far less time than the parents I know. Our peers, it was funny, would say to us, gosh, I don't know how you do that. I don't know how you have time for that. And I would look at their lives and I'd go, you guys, your whole life surrounds the school. Your wife spends all her time in the minivan, going back and forth to the schools, going back and forth to this or that, event or some kind of requirement. You can't take a vacation. Everything revolves around your children and around the school. And those children would come home with, 3 hours of homework. Well, for us, a school day would last, from from elementary school into middle school would last only about 3 to 4 hours. And that's because the typical school day is full of dead time. Going from classroom to classroom, study hall, lunch period, PE, recess, all these kinds of things that are dead time in order to fill, the full school day. Well, without that in your own home, school goes pretty quickly. Second of all is I loved, because I told my wife we would do it for 1 year and as a trial and just see what we thought of it. And in my work, I was traveling. I was going to interesting places around the world where I could just, take, at that time, my oldest son, who was, 6 or 7 years old, he could go along. And we decided, gosh, we really love this. We could acquaint our children with the world. So my children were there, in my conversations with, a Christopher Hitchens or with a John Lennox or with a Peter Singer they were there. You're sitting and could watch their dad, engaging in the realm of big ideas. They could also participate in the work. They learned responsibility. They learned a work ethic. And we could inculcate our values into our children so that what's really important, I think Deuteronomy 6:7 really places the responsibility for educating children not on the grandparents, not on the community. It places it on the parents. It is the responsibility of the parents. And it's so critically important that we're aware of that and that we're investing in our children rather than, to your point, at the beginning of this question, subcontracting it to someone else. So I would encourage parents to always ask themselves, who is the most important influence in your child's life? If your child is being educated outside of the home, it almost certainly isn't the parent. It's a youth director or a teacher in school, a coach, is someone like that. And it shouldn't be that way. Even if those are good influences, positive influences, and frequently they are not, the parent should have primacy of influence in the lives of their children and should be, raising them up in the fear and knowledge of the Lord. And that's so critically important. But you also become a student of your child,
Yeah.
meaning you begin to recognize, I really need to work on this with him. This is a weakness in character. Or, you know what? He's really showing an aptitude for this, or a talent for this, or an interest in this. And I can encourage in those directions. And so for us, it was great. We loved it. Our children were able to travel with us. They were able to see the world. They were able to grow close together. You know, my own home, I was public school educated, and so any deficiencies in my logic here, you can point to the fact that I was educated by the state. But I wasn't close to my brother at all, and that's because you didn't really spend any time together. He's a lot older than me, and we weren't even in the same schools, and so um, the time we spent together was fairly minimal.
Yeah.
He had his friends, I had my friends. We lived in the same house. We had meals together. We interacted, but we weren't close. And my boys all grew up, and then eventually Sasha, when we adopted her, they all grew up close to each other, and that remains true today. They are each other's best friends. They like hanging out with each other. And I think they recognized the value of the education they had because they grew up as little mini Indiana Joneses, because they were, I might say, hey, today we're taking a day off from school because we're going to go to the British Museum here in London.
Yeah.
Or we're going to, I know that not everybody can do some of the things that we got to do, but the point doesn't change. A child learns best from their parent. And the reason for that is because, and it's interesting, the data bears this out, that parents, even parents who are not college educated, their children are outpacing every other education group. And it's because a parent goes into it with an attitude, my child can learn and by golly, will learn. Versus becoming a child that's, one of 30 in a classroom, or let's say you're paying top dollar and it's only 15 in a classroom, still a lot. And your child can get lost in that mix. Individual attention really doesn't much exist. Maybe it does for a few, teachers' pets, but not as a rule. And so I'm a massive advocate of homeschooling. I would suggest to you that if this country had maintained, homeschool, which is, by the way, which is what happened before the 1930s when compulsory public school education, was invented, came along. I would argue that this country wouldn't be anywhere near, the kind of problems that we have today because the family unit would be stronger because of that. Our family values would be stronger. The spiritual strength, backbone that you can, pass on to your children would be much, much better because of that.
Yeah, that is, I mean, I couldn't have said it better myself. And another thought that came to mind was the. It seems to me homeschooling is much closer to the natural way that God intended than putting kids, like you said, 30 different children from different backgrounds and worldviews in the same room to learn together. Um, Being taught by someone who is not going to be nearly as invested as the child's own parent. So,
Yeah, well, for sure. I mean, listen, Satan's huge victory in this was separating, the parents from the children. And not only that, but now parents accept that as being a normal and a good thing.
right,
It's neither normal nor good. I mean, it's typical, but it's not normal in the sense of that this is the way it should be. It isn't the way it should be. But you see, now parents just think that's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to subcontract the education of your children to other people. And listen, John, over the years, I have been consulted and continue to be consulted by a lot of parents, just people I know, who find themselves good, solid Christian parents who find themselves at odds with their children. And so they come to me and say, hey, can you talk to Junior? Can you talk to our daughter, who's declared herself trans, or our son has declared himself an atheist, or, he doesn't want to go to school, or he's bought into this idea, or he's using drugs, or whatever the case may be. And the really, really hard thing I have to say to parents in those circumstances is they will often ask me, we don't understand. How is it we have a child who doesn't share our values? And the answer to that question is, you paid to have your children weaponized against you. They spent 8 to 10 hours a day, maybe more, with people other than you, absorbing their ideas, not yours, absorbing their values, not yours. You're just simply providing the place where they live, and you're funding it. On average, a parent spends about 15 minutes a day with their children. That's it. And that cannot compete with the world. It cannot. So, parents, listen, some would say, by the way, in this, well, that's okay for you to say, you're probably rich. You know how much money I made when my wife and I made the decision to homeschool? $28,500 a year.
Mm,
That was 30 years ago. So let's say today it's maybe 40,000. Okay, not much. We struggled. My wife, was a nurse. She had the ability to make more money than I did at that point. And but we made the decision, no, we're committed to this, and we're going to trust the Lord in this, and we're going to get through this. Now that meant, we lived way out in the, in the boondocks, because we couldn't afford a house in town. And, I can remember our van breaking down and we couldn't afford to put a transmission in it. And, there were things, that happened that were very, very hard from a financial point of view. But I think my boys, we didn't have Sasha at that particular time. I think they look on those as some of the happiest days of their life. And certainly Lori and I look back on them as days that they were very hard financially, but they were really blessed times. Those were the wonderful family times. And I don't put the material well-being of my children over their spiritual well-being. And that you drive a very nice Lexus, and your kids wear designer clothes and have their own cell phone, that's no good if they're going straight to hell.
right.
You see, so it's very, very important that parents make these difficult decisions.
Yeah. So we are at the 30-minute mark. I do have.
Ask me one more question here, John, and then I have to go. I'm going to go and have a lovely dinner right now. If I'm a little red, by the way, I've been outside working and I am still sweating.
Yeah.
I mean, summer has hit in
Yes.
the American South, so I'm still a little red faced as I'm cooling off. For that, you don't have that problem, but you see, I do have that problem. But go ahead and ask me one more.
Yeah. Well, so I believe that one of the ways we can get more parents to uh, take on this new thing that we're talking about is if pastors themselves would begin to include this as part of their kind of mandate, if you will. One of my favorite articles that I ever read from you is titled "A Letter to the America's Pastors and Churches,"
Mm.
and
Wrote that at the front end of COVID.
yes, and in this article you said that you said, quote, America is on the brink of revolution. She is in want of a generation of ministers of the gospel who are prepared to courageously fulfill their calling, come what may. You must preach now with a strict adherence to the word, with great conviction, great force, and greater urgency than ever before. And you have every reason to be optimistic about the outcome. In addition of having God Almighty on your side, consider the data. According to Pew Forum, evangelicals alone number a whopping 26% of the U.S. population, while those calling themselves Christian account for an additional 50%. The American church is a sleeping giant. However, its members need you to interpret the times and give them strength and leadership to move them to action. So one of the actions I believe that has to happen if we are to reclaim, at least equip the next few generations here, is education. I think education need to, as far as Christians are concerned, they cannot continue to send up to 80% of American Christian children to government schools, and that the church will be effective uh, going forward. So, what would you say, basically tying the ideas of having consequence to the equipping of the children in the next generation, with pastors being the ones that basically have to be able to interpret this kind of thing to their congregations?
Well, listen, you should see your pastor, you should see your youth director, you should see, any teachers that are playing a role in the lives of your children as merely a supplement to what you as a parent are doing with your own children. They shouldn't be the meat and potatoes of your children's education or spiritual diet. That should be you. They should be the garnish on the plate. You should be the one providing the meat and potatoes. But I also think that education, comes in ways that are less formal. I mean, yes, you can say, I want you to read this book, or, I need you to go and, learn your multiplication tables. But and while that's important, there has to be an action element of learning. Now, sometimes one of the wonderful things that children can learn at home with their parents is they can learn what you do for a living. They can learn. I told my wife, we were struggling. Poor Sasha, when we adopted Sasha. So, Sasha was speaking Russian. She had English was not her first language, and here she was trying to learn that, and then all the a decade of learning that had been neglected in orphanages. She was born in an orphanage and then raised in them for the first 10 years of her life until we adopted her. And, we're trying to get her ready. Lori's trying to get her ready for college and this kind of stuff. And I said, Lori, forget that. Teach Sasha how to run a household. Teach her how to cook. Teach her how to mend. Teach her how to clean. Teach her how to do the laundry. Teach her how to, be a woman who manages the finances in the household, who runs a household. Very few girls are taught those things anymore. And a woman who can do it is worth her weight in gold. She will never be without work. And it is because she has skills that she's acquired that are always in need. I mean, when is someone who can cook not in need? When is someone who can clean not in need? When is someone who can organize not in need? Sasha learned all those things in spades. And not only that, but we discovered that she was quite gifted in the kitchen, actually. And so, she was taking some classes, outside the home, to learn some things that maybe we ourselves couldn't teach her. But, those are things they can learn. Let's say your children are helping you with carpentry or yard work or learning electrical wiring or things of that nature. But they also learn the faith. A mama bear, she takes her cubs out and she says, you guys sit right here while I'm going to go take down that bull elk. You watch how I do it. And that's how they learn. They watch, bear cubs, tiger cubs, lion cubs. They learn by watching their parents. And then they mimic that. I think it's very interesting. Right now, my German Shepherd, who's semi-famous, Ranger, he got 10 million likes, online after I was swatted. Ranger's 7 years old, and Ranger, he goes about a job in this household as if it's his employment. I mean, he is on patrol constantly. That's what he does. He's a German Shepherd, and it's just in their DNA. Well, we just now got a new pup, little German, another German Shepherd, full-blooded German Shepherd. She's only 5 months old. Her name is Scout. And what is hilarious to watch is that Scout watches him and she mimics his behavior. Now, that can be very bad behavior if he were bad, badly behaved dog. Unfortunately, he isn't. But it's funny because you see her sitting and looking up at him. What is he doing? And she mimics the behavior. She learns from him. And that's not just true in the animal kingdom. That has to be true with our children. And when your parents see you take a stand for your faith, when they see you gently engaging someone with the gospel, when they see you helping someone in need, when they see you turn the other cheek, or when they see you stand in the gap and fight,
Yeah.
when they see you being generous to someone, when they see you not respond unkindly when maybe they knew you really wanted to. Your children learn from that.
Yeah.
And so I would really encourage any parents who are listening to us, you can do this. You can do this. And the moment you decided you wanted to have kids, you took on this responsibility. It is your job to do it and raise up godly seed. And I want to offer this little warning. In Scripture, God judges Eli's household.
Mm.
And he says, and I do it because Eli's sons made themselves vile, and Eli did not restrain them. So the way the children turned out, God didn't say it was the fault of the priest or the grandparents. He didn't even say it was the fault of the wife. He said it's Eli's fault because he is the head of the household. It's his responsibility to see to the spiritual education of his children, and he did not do it. And as a result, his children are vile, and it's his fault, and I'm going to judge him for it. That should send a chill through all of us.
Yeah.
That the job of parenting is an awesome job, and so is the job of making my dinner, and I'm going to go eat it.
Well, thank you so much, Larry, for stopping by and talking to me. I definitely look forward to whatever else will be coming down the pike on the ideas have consequences. Um, before we go, is there anything in terms of that we should be looking forward to from you as the
You
man?
can just subscribe. You can subscribe to Ideas Have Consequences on YouTube, or we're being choked, by YouTube. They're suppressing us and not really sending out notifications. But you can subscribe over there, and you can follow me on Twitter. So I look forward to that. John, it's great to be with you. Always want to be an encouragement to you and your young family. God bless you.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Take care, brother.
Bye-bye.